today? Will you ask these two questions? Do I yield to the Lord every area of my life? My possessions, my family, even my own life. Just ask yourself that, and then read 25 through 35. You don't have to answer it to me. Just answer the question and then read what Jesus says. And then the other question is, this is even harder, I think, than looking at my money, my car, my house, and my life. Do I trust Jesus? Do I trust Jesus to care for me? Completely. Or do I give him control, then seize it back? Give him control, then pull it back? Or maybe I let him control some things, but I handle some parts of it for him, because Jesus surely doesn't know what it's like to work where I work, or to go to school where I go, or to be friends with the friends I have. I'll handle them, because if they knew the me that loved Jesus, it would be really hard for me in life. Ask yourself those questions. It's not easy. Nobody said it's easy. Jesus never said it would be easy. To follow Jesus and to share the cross may mean losing family, may mean losing neighbors, may mean losing friends, may mean that you don't get to do the things that you want to do. Sometimes people aren't going to support what you believe in. And sometimes that's something people can't handle. Our understanding of what counting the cost means is only theoretical until we put it into action. It's just a theory till we put it into action. And that's what I'm asking you with these questions. Those who count the cost will be ready, Jesus says, to implement these when the moment comes. And so we have to rely on God, rely on his wisdom, and when the time comes, Jesus says, choose me. So that's what I'm challenging you with today. When the time comes, choose Jesus. We have to pay careful attention every day, every moment, to making Jesus the priority in our life. That's my challenge. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this time. Thank you for this word. I pray that, Father, in all that we do, this basic question that you ask of those who wish to follow you will be one that we can come back with a yes, Lord. Yes, Master. You are first in my life. And then I pray, Father, that those areas that we keep trying to pull back and we keep trying to handle as men and women, as flesh, Father, show us those times in our lives. Illuminate them to us. Help us to see them so we can say, we're sorry. Let us give these back. But I just pray for every life here. I pray for every person in this place that they would find a place where they can come to you and they can give themselves to you. I thank you for the blessing of all that we have, all that you've given us. And Father, just help us to use it. Help us to put it to use for your kingdom. Knowing what this passage says. If we cannot give it all to you, we can't be your follower. So Father, just help us give all that it is that we try to hang on to you. And I pray this in your precious, precious name. Let's turn to Luke chapter 14 this morning. We finished Luke chapter 12 last week, and we're going to move over to Luke chapter 14. Much of what is in 13 and some of 14 we've worked real heavy through on Wednesday night. So I'm going to move and trying to keep this emphasis on the very words of Jesus through these 10 chapters of Luke, where he speaks directly to what it means to be a disciple, a follower of him. Let's look at chapter 14, verse 25 through 35 this morning. A lot of subheadings in your Bible say the cost of discipleship. So this is one of those places where it talks about the very cost of discipleship. And with no screen, you'll actually have to use a Bible or listen to me. Okay? So, now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned to them and said, Jesus speaking, if anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Now this rings of chapter 12. Last week when we saw the divisions that would become, and Jesus named every type of relationship one could have. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. For which of you, desiring to build a tower, does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it? Otherwise, when he has laid a foundation and is not able to finish, all who see it begin to mock him, saying, this man began to build and was not able to finish. Or what king going out to encounter another king in war will not sit down and first deliberate whether he is able with 10,000 to meet him who comes against him with 20,000? And if not, while the other is yet a great way off, he sends a delegation and asks for a term of peace. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple. And then Jesus finishes with this warning about salt. Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? If it is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile, it is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. Just so you know, when you're talking about a manure pile, it's talking about making a fire. That's kind of an odd verse in the Bible, but they use the salt to spark and to make fires in this time. So I don't want you to get stuck on that verse. Let's go back. So this is a call for us to consider what discipleship means. Okay, he's very direct in this passage. What discipleship means to us. So it stands at the very center of this journey by Jesus to Jerusalem. That's this time period that's going on in these 10 chapters or so. Jesus is journeying to Jerusalem, and it kind of summarizes this shift in emphasis in his confrontation with the Sadducees and Pharisees and scribes and the leaders. And there's kind of a shift here now where he's going to focus on his disciples and those who would wish to follow him. So he's been arguing with the Sanhedrin. Now he begins more of a direct teaching to the disciples. So, clearly discipleship is not easy. Following Jesus, there's nothing easy about it. But our accountability to God and the thoroughness that this task required, that we understand what is required if we wish to be followers of Jesus. Jesus makes this very clear. His attention here is turning to his followers. He's had these fights and these arguments with the leaders of the church in his day. And so he's turning to the disciples and he's looking at them, looking them right in the eyes. He asked them to be followers, asked them to assess what it means to be a follower, to be a disciple. He wants them to be aware of what it's going to take to walk the full way with Jesus. And so his main point is that successful discipleship requires that Jesus be the priority in your life. That's his main point here in this passage, that in one's life, if one wishes to be a follower of Jesus, Jesus has to be the priority in one's life. So we must count the cost and of following him if we are going to finish the walk. And so he will, when he directs us, his will and the direction he leads us in is the most important thing in our lives. Okay? To be a follower, Jesus is saying, my will and my direction has to be the most important thing in your life. So we must present our lives to him and then reflect the values that honor God. And so Jesus, I think obviously, and this is in all 4 of the Gospels, Jesus obviously has no desire to lead these men and somehow hide the requirements from them that are required to be a follower in order to get them to decide to follow him and then tell them later what it looks like to be a follower. Jesus wants to make clear from the very beginning, this is what it looks like to be a follower. Do not decide to follow me until you count the cost, till you understand what it means to be a follower. He makes clear just how much to the disciples then and to us today he requires. He must be first. It's clear. Or one cannot be a follower, right? That's what he said. Counting the cost. You know, what it was going to take to make it all the way. But, so to get the point across here, he's saying that, in other words here, to count the cost in building, that in moving towards successful discipleship means a reflection. It's not an automatic thing. And there's absolutely no positive testimony in a walk with God that gets abandoned. Think of all the people you know that at some point in their life appeared to be walking with God and now they're not. We all know people like this. What kind of testimony is that for Jesus? It's a bad one. It's a really bad one. And so it's tragic. It's tragic, actually. And then the second picture is this king that's going to war. And this one's a little bit more tricky because you think, you know, if I've got 10,000 and they have 20, well, automatically I'm not going out to fight if I'm smart, right? And Jesus says, you know, if these soldiers realize, if this king realizes that he can't win, then what's he going to do? Send out a delegation, and he's going to negotiate peace, right? And so Jesus says those who want to be his disciples are going to make this kind of assessment. Okay? A person must negotiate peace, but this is where it gets kind of tricky. He's talking about negotiating peace with God. Because what you're talking about here is making a decision. I'm either going to follow Jesus or I'm not going to follow Jesus. I'm going to be on my own. And that's not really a choice because that means I'm going to be against God. And that's like the 10 going against the 20. So the other is the wiser approach. He says, I'm going to ask for terms of peace and I'm going to accept them on God's gracious terms. And so what does that mean? It means that it means giving God what is due him. And then following him. God desires followers who are completely aligned with him. The giving up of all. A-L-L means all. There's no way to think about that other than what do I have to give to God to be a follower? All. I have to give it all to him. You know, it means recognizing that God has a claim on every single area of your life. So you think about that. Okay, you have a life that's here, right? Church friends. You have a life that's at home. You have a life with friends. You have a life at work. You have a life with an extended family. And you can even think of other lives. God says, I claim them all. If you're going to follow me, they're all mine. And I won't accept anything less. These are the terms. But I give God my spiritual life, some might say. God says that's not good enough. I'll give God my church life and my family life. But I'm a real different person when I get around people I work with. God says, not good enough. The student may say, well, I follow God when I'm around my family and my friends and such, but you just don't know how hard it is to be a Christian and go to school. God says, it's not good enough, then. It's not good enough. And so, no one, Jesus is saying, can know at the start. And think about this. This is important. No one knows at the beginning everything that's going to be involved. Okay? And especially in this walk with Jesus. I'm sure that every Christian here, there's things you could say that I never knew this was going to happen in my life when I decided to follow Jesus. Some of these things could be very tragic that have happened. But I never knew. I never thought this could happen to me when I decided to follow Jesus. And one, to some extent, enters into this journey without completely understanding what it's going to look like to follow God. But the one thing God demands is, you give me access to it all. You can't shut off one part of your life from me. You have to give me full access. We may have to deal with the kids at school. We may have to deal with the people at work. We may have to deal with your family members who aren't Christians. But you have to give it to me. You can't keep that for yourself. And so, the major difference in this passage 2,000 years ago and today is that it was much more difficult to follow Jesus in this time. And we see what happened to followers of Jesus. But I would say, unless you look maybe like 15 years ago and then 250 years back from that, what's called Christendom, that it is getting a lot harder. It is getting a lot harder today to be a follower of Jesus. But the call in the text hasn't changed. I mean, it may look different to me, but the call from Jesus hasn't changed. Discipleship requires giving Jesus our allegiance. And so the Lord wants to have priority in every single area in our lives. So understanding how this works itself out in life, how do we figure that out? Well, it comes through interaction with God, prayer. I think absolutely involves participation in a healthy community of God's people. I don't know how people work out their salvation without Christian friends and family. I don't. And listening through God through every means He makes possible. So that aspect from the time of Jesus to this time, it's timeless. It still exists. That's still how we do it. So think about this journey. Think about this journey that we're on as a long journey. Okay? Think about it as a long journey. So what happens? As we follow Christ, we grow. As we listen to His Word, as we listen to Him in prayer, as we're with other Christians, we grow in our understanding of what it means to be a follower of Jesus, right? Most of us, if we're honest, would say day by day, week by week, month by month, it seems as though God is constantly calling for more from me. It seems as I go through my life, God is constantly expecting more out of me. He's trying to use me. He's trying to come into my life in fresh and new ways as I go further along in this walk of discipleship. And we need to pay careful attention to those ways that God is trying to pull us closer to Him. We never are going to completely arrive as disciples. So whether you live to be 20 or 30 or 40 or 90 or 100, we are always on this road of discipleship. It goes on throughout our entire life. Unfortunately, we are very slow to give up this control that God wants. As we go along this road, it's hard for us to let go, to give things up. And so, in a real sense, a disciple, just think of the word learner. Okay? We're all learners. We're learning. And a learner is a person who is in a constant state of renovation, of remodel. And I would not like it if my home were in a constant state of remodel. It's dusty and dirty and uncomfortable when things are being remodeled, right? We don't like it. We like things to get finished. Especially wives. You start something, they want you to finish it, right? But this picture that we have of discipleship is something that goes on our whole life. We're in this constant state of remodel, and it's not clean and tidy. It's ugly and messy, and it hurts. There's pain, and there's places along the road that we stumble and we hurt ourselves and we cry out to God. Why? But it's all part of this process that He's planned out before the beginning of time to mold us into the follower that He planned us to be, and to ultimately the worshiper for eternity that He had in mind when He created us. And so, let me say this too. When you remodel, you often have to tear out before you can build up, right? Anybody who's ever changed out an old bathroom or kitchen, you get in there and it's a mess. And a lot of times you have to dig deeper than you ever thought you'd have to dig. I'm telling you, it's no different for Jesus. Sometimes there's a lot of things He has to tear out of us before He can build it back. I've seen some ugly bathrooms and some ugly kitchens that have been remodeled, and you're like, wow, that's nothing in comparison to what Jesus wants to create in us. And so, the rebuilding that God does is not always easy. It's not always pleasant. But what's the goal of renovation and remodel? To make new. And so what emerges is better than what was there in the start. The hope of this transformation is what discipleship is. It makes discipleship worth the journey. And so Jesus makes this final appeal. And it's a warning in this picture. It's really a warning. He said, salt is of value as long as it continues to be salty. Right? Whether they were using it as, for salt or as to start fires. If it lost its saltiness, it had no value, and they just simply threw it out. So get this. Most of us are on salt-free diets today, so we're thinking, I don't need salt. Well, but get this picture. If the salt was no good, they threw it out. And Jesus is saying it's like that with discipleship. This is why He told this parable. It's like that with discipleship. What this is saying is that God can dispense with disciples that do not complete the call. What good to God is a disciple, a follower, that will not give his all to God? Jesus is saying it's just like salt. If it's lost its saltiness, you cast it out. So, when I say get this, we need to get this. It means that discipline, even as severe as taking one's life away, can come from God. Get this in this passage. And, that's why he calls for us to hear what he says here. Discipleship takes dedication. Discipleship takes focus. And God is very concerned with how his disciples follow him. And how they walk. Different times involve different looking walks. To walk and follow Jesus today looks a lot different than walking those roads in the Middle East heading towards Jerusalem. Looks completely different. And not everyone's called to suffer. Some are called to suffer, some aren't. Lives will look very different in following Jesus. But those differences don't alter the need to walk in faithfulness. And Jesus wants everyone. Jesus wants every single follower on the journey to bring to it an understanding of what is required to be a follower. And then to resolve to stay on the path. That's what this passage is here for. He doesn't want any of the disciples to stop following him. He doesn't say this about casting out the salt so people will get mad and say, well, if you think about me that way, who cares? You don't really know. Jesus is using the salt passage to show how serious it is that you completely give your life to him. So that's what I'm challenging you with today. I want you to ask just 2 questions. And they must be ready to identify with his suffering. Some people might think that this means I need to get 2 boards and put a cross together and carry this cross around. I've seen it done. People do it. It's not what Jesus is talking about. He doesn't want you to pick up a cross and carry it around. He's saying, be ready to identify with the sufferings that come from being a cross bearer. And so that may mean exclusion. You guys that are in school, high school, college, it may mean exclusion. At work, among friends, it may mean exclusion. And in some places in the world, it just flat may mean isolation. You may be cut off. You may be pushed out. You may not be allowed to be with your family. You may not be allowed to be with your friends. To trust him, to trust Jesus is to embrace him as the answer, the only answer, but the answer to the journey of salvation. And including these rough times that come in walking this path with Jesus. So this is what he's trying to do, and he gets right to the point. He doesn't, as far as what's recorded here, he goes straight to the point. He says, in order to be a follower, one must what? Hate father and mother and wife and brothers and sisters, even their own life. Straight to the point. You need to understand, we need to understand today the background of this comment. He's not literally saying that you must hate your brother and sister and mother and father and even your own life. But what he's saying here is when you're forced to choose, between mother or wife or brother or sister, even yourself, Jesus has to come first. Kind of had a right in my face example of this. I was at the Circle Grill on Tuesday morning meeting a friend that I've begun meeting about for 10 weeks now. And my son went because my son's best friend is his son, and my son was in town, as you remember. And we're talking, and one of my comments in the very beginning of the conversation is that in church you have to be very careful some of the words you use because the meaning of those words has changed. And I even said sometimes when I'm thinking through things, I'll bounce them off of Kate, and I'll say, Kate, what does that mean to you? What does this word mean to you? And she'll tell me. Then I'll know, okay, that word has changed. People understand that word different. That happens with language. But we sat there for about an hour and a half, and then this guy who had been sitting behind us came over to the table, and he said, I heard what you said about words changing meaning. And then, completely left that, he said, yeah, my son is married to a Mormon. And I was thinking, what does that have to do with words changing meaning? He said, but for the sake of peace in the family, we just ignore it. Every time you go over, she pulls out that book, Joseph, whatever his name is, and tries to share their faith with us. And we just let her go on because he loves her. And I said, you know, it's funny. There's a verse in the passage that I'm going to be using to preach this week that says, if you want to be a follower of me, it may mean, and in the passage we used last week, it may mean that there might be divisions among what? Fathers and mothers and wives and children and brothers and sisters, even our own life. There's no room for accepting that in your life. Jesus says, no, it's me or no one else. So, you know, he is to be loved among everyone else. You know, this first century setting, it really was applicable because, as we looked at last week, and I won't go into it again, it really might mean being pushed out of the family. Still does today. With Muslims, with Jews, other faiths. But Jesus is saying, people, you need to understand the cost. You need to understand what the cost is. And then he wants to get this point across clearly. Let's look at these two illustrations that he uses to get the point across. One is a man who builds a watchtower. Any of you guys have a watchtower on your property? I don't have a watchtower, but does it really matter what he's talking about building? If you're going to build something, a building project, you do what? You figure out how much it's going to cost. Okay? And then you either hire someone to build it, or you go to Home Depot and you build it yourself, right? Have you ever started anything you didn't finish? Yeah. It's not good to do that in your front yard, you know, where people can see it, because all they do is walk by and point it out. Look, so-and-so, he's been working on that for 10 years and he still hasn't finished it. You know, some of you wives can think of something like that and think, and I wish we could get rid of it because it's just been out there. Or it may be in your kitchen. It may be something finished for 10 years. I won't get off on too many examples, but we have a friend that'll do that. He'll tear out the bathroom and then just work his way through it, putting it back together. If he's got the money this month to put in the toilet, okay, maybe I'll put in the toilet. But it may be 6 months before something else goes in. But he works that way. But we look at those kind of projects. I don't know, it may even be a business that they spend a whole lot of money putting in the business and buying all the fixtures, and then they ran out of money before they hired anyone or actually started business, and they go broke. And you look at those things and you think, what were they thinking? There's a restaurant up here in Mockingbird in Abrams, and it looks really awesome. It's a Haneros. No, but they built it like a year ago, and we kept saying we should go there, and then it closed one day. We should have gone. But you know how much money it takes to start a restaurant? A lot of money. And they'll probably be selling off the stove and the refrigerator and all that at pennies on the dollar or something. But anyway, you say that about that. They must not